They were 8 Japanese gentlemen having a fish dinner at Bentley's. They spoke to each other readily in their incompressible tongue, but always with a courteous smile and often with a small bow. All but one of them wore glasses. Sometimes the pretty girl who sat in the window behind gave them a passing glance, but her own problem seemed too serious for her to pay really attention to anyone in the world except herself and her companion. She had thin blonde hair and her face was pretty and petite in a regency way, oval like a miniature. Thought she had the worst way of speaking, perhaps the sense of the school, Riordan or Gentleman Ladies College, which she had not long ago left. She wore a man's signet ring on her engagement finger as I sat down at my table with the Japanese gentleman between us, she
So
said.
you see we can marry next week.
Yes.
Her company appeared a little distraught. He refilled their glasses with Chavlis and said,
Of course, but mother.
I missed some of the conversation then, because the oldest Japanese gentleman leaned across the table with a smile and a little bow and uttered the whole paragraph like the mutter from an aviary, while everyone bent towards him and smiled and listening, and I couldn't help attending to himself. The girl's fiancé resembled her physically. I could see them as two miniatures hanging navy in the days when a certain weakness and sensitivity were no bar to promotion. She said,
They are giving me an advance of £500 and they've sold the paperback rights already.
a hard commercial declaration came as a shock to me. It was a shock, too, that she was one of my own profession. She could have been more than 20. She deserved better of life, he said.
But my uncle.
You know you don't get within. This way we shall be quite independent.
Uh, you will be independent.
He said grudgingly.
The wine trade couldn't really suit you, would it? I spoke to my publisher about you and there's a very good chance if you began with some reading.
But I don't know a thing about books.
I would help you at start.
My mother says that writing is a good crutch.
£500 and off the paperback rights is a pretty solid crutch.
She said.
The Chevrolet is good, isn't it?
I dare to say.
I began to change my opinion of him. He had not to the Nelson touch. He was dumb to defeat. She came alongside and wrecked him fore and aft.
Do you know what Mrs. Dwight said?
Is white.
Darling, you don't listen, do you? My publisher, he said he hadn't read a first novel in the last 10 years, which has showed such power of observation.
That's wonderful.
He said sadly.
Wonderful.
Only he wants me to change the title.
Yes.
He doesn't want the ever rolling stream. He wants to call it the Chelsea set.
What did you say?
I agreed. I do think that with the first novel, one should try to keep one publishers happy, especially when really is going to pay for our marriage.
I see what you mean.
Absent-mindedly, he straight his chalice with a fork. Perhaps before the engagement, he had always both. The Japanese gentlemen had finished their fish, and with very little English but elaborate courtesy, they were ordering from the middle-aged waitress a fresh fruit salad. The girl looked at them, and then she looked at me, but I think she saw only the future. I want very much to warn her against any future based on a first novel called The Chelsea Set. I was on the side of his mother. It was a humiliating thought, but I was probably about her mother's age. I want to say to her, are you certain your publisher is telling you the truth? Publishers are human. They may sometimes exaggerate their virtues of the young and the pretty. Will the Chelsea set be ready in 5 years? Are you prepared for the years of effort, the long defeat of doing nothing well? As the years pass, writing will not become any easier. The daily effort will grow harder to endure. Those powers of observation will become enfeebled. You will be judged when you reach your 40s by performance and not
My
by
next
content.
novel is going to be about Saint-Tropez.
I didn't know you haven't been there.
I haven't. A fresh eye is terribly important. I thought we might settle down there for 6 months.
There wouldn't be much left of the vineyard by the time.
The advance is only advance. I gave 15% after the 5,000 copies and 20% after 10. And of course, another advance will be due, darling, when the next book's finished. A bigger one than Chelsea said sells well.
Suppose it doesn't.
Mr. White said it will. He ought to know.
My uncle would start me at 1200.
But darling, how could you come to Saint-Tropez?
Perhaps we'd better to marry when you come back.
She said harshly.
I might come back if the Chelsea sets sell well enough.
Oh,
She looked at me and the party of the Japanese gentleman. She finished her wine. She said,
Is this a quarrel?
no.
I've got the title for the next book. Les Yeux Bleus.
I thought the zoo was blue.
She looked at him with disappointment.
You don't really want to be married to a novelist, do you?
You aren't one yet.
I was born one. Mr. Dwight says my powers of observation.
Yes, you told me that. But, dear, couldn't you observe it near home? Here in London?
I've done that in the Chelsea set. I don't want to repeat myself.
The bill had been lying beside them from some time now. He took out his wallet to pay. But she snatched the paper out of his reach. She said,
This is my celebration.
What of?
The Chelsea set, of course. Darling, you're awfully decorative. But sometimes, well, you simply don't connect.
I'd rather, if you don't mind.
No, darling, this is on me and Mr. Dwight, of course.
He submitted just as two of Japanese gentlemen gave tongue simultaneously, then stopped abruptly and bowed to each other, as though they were blocked in a doorway.
I had thought the two young people matching miniatures, but what a contrast in fact that was. The same type of prettiness could contain weakness and strength. Her Regency's counterpart, I suppose, would have borne a dozen children without the aid of anesthetics, while we would have fallen an easy victim to the first dark eyes in Naples. Would there one day be a dozen books on our shelf? They have to be born without an anesthetic too. I found myself hoping that the Chelsea set would prove to be a disaster and that eventually would take up photography modeling while he established himself solidly in the wine trade in St. James. I didn't like to think of her as Mr. Humphrey, word of her generation not that I would live so long. Old age saves us from the realization of a great many fears. I wondered to which publishing firm Dwight belonged. I could imagine the blurb we would have already written about her abrasive powers of observation. There would be a photo, if was be wise, on the back of the jacket for reviewers, as well as publisher, a human, and she didn't look like Mr. Humphrey Ward. I could hear them talking while they found their coats at the back of the restaurant, he said.
I wonder what all these Japanese are doing here.
Japanese?
She said.
What Japanese, darling? Sometimes you're so evasive, I think you don't want to marry me at all.